Welcome to DIA Today, Democracy in America Today. I'm Matt Parks alongside Dave Corbin. Glad to have you with us to explore the ideas behind today's headlines.
My left eye sees pollution, those dirty fuels are burning, the earth's whole climate's churning, clean energy solution. My right eye scans the bill, fossil fuels are cheap, wind and solar too steep. Drill, baby, drill. Predefined, misaligned, polarized division. Shuttered mind, worse than blind. 2020 vision.
How's it going, Dave?
As I was mentioning pre-show, a little sore. Are closing on our house in South Colorado Springs tomorrow, so I had to
Wow.
pretend like I was 24 yesterday for about 4 hours,
Yeah.
trying to move things. Feeling my age today, however, but all good. Yeah, we're selling the house in South Colorado Springs, and we're moving to the northernmost part of Colorado Springs, which will make the commute into Colorado Christian that much easier. But note that we're not in Pittsburgh, which is unfortunate.
Yeah.
This breaks our streak, Detroit and Green Bay. It would have been great to be in Pittsburgh today for the NFL draft. It's one of my favorite. It's just a crazy, isn't it, event that you have more people, I think, watching the draft than most live broadcasts of actual games in any
Right.
sport. Uh, yeah.
Well, hope springs eternal, and yeah, I know you've been reporting on location the last 2 years from the draft, and it sounds like it's just a great group of people, obviously real diehard fans of all the different teams and the excitement that comes around this time of year when you think, hey, we could get the guy that becomes the guy that really turns things around, and this is the chance, certainly for those teams at the top of the draft who are coming off their 4-13 season and thinking about what Patriots did last year, and hey, you could be just a good draft or two away.
Exactly. Yeah, the only fans that disappoint at gatherings like this, I may have mentioned this before. I'm sorry, Josh Blander, but Eagles fans. You want to guess the second? They don't like Eagles fans, this other group, but
Yeah.
these are the Cowboys fans. So Eagles and Cowboys fans. Now, I'm not saying Patriots fans aren't obnoxious, but
Sure.
at least the gatherings like this, we're very much in the spirit of we're all in the NFL. But
Yeah.
looking forward to today's show. We're moving forward, right? Getting closer
Yeah.
to July 4th, 2026 and July 4th, 1776. So why don't you lead us off, Matt, with just the, what takes place between our last show where we went through Edmund Burke's effort at conciliation and then Patrick Henry's Give Me Liberty or Give Me Death speech. So that's in March 22nd, 23rd of 1775, and then what
Yep.
follows?
Yeah. So, March turns into April, and the war begins in April, just 3.5 weeks after these efforts, really last-ditch efforts on the part of Burke, and previous to that, Lord Chatham, in other words, William Pitt, to try to find a path forward that would keep the empire together. And so April 19th, we have the battles of Lexington and Concord, relatively minor skirmishes in the big scheme of things, battles, but not on the scale that we're going to see later on in the war. But at that point, the colonies begin to talk about gathering again for a Second Continental Congress. So the first one was during the fall of 1774. But by May 10th of 1775, 12 of the 13 colonies have reconvened in Philadelphia, all but Georgia. Once again, Georgia will join them by July 4th, 1776, but not just yet. And they create a Continental Army. That's the first order of business, June 14th, 1775, just 3 days before the Battle of Bunker Hill. So that army is not involved in that battle. Obviously, haven't been able to pull it all together, and they appoint Washington commander-in-chief. And likewise, he's not on the scene there in Bunker Hill for that battle. But from that point forward, he will be the one that organizes the war effort. And it's really now, in a sense, a national effort, even though there's no nation just yet. We now have people coming from north and south, middle colonies, etc., all around a common cause, and recognizing that what's happening in Massachusetts and Boston area in particular is the cause of America and not just the cause of that people.
It's amazing to think, right, how much has changed in 250 years. I don't know when the last time you'd been through Lexington or Concord, Massachusetts in the 21st century, but can you imagine like these kind of beautiful homes, all worth $3 to $5 million, a lot of Volvos, a lot of soccer moms can, imagine them taking up their, lawn chairs and fighting for revolution. It's not going to happen in 2026. Yeah, but happened back then.
Yeah, the militia, the Minutemen, ready to go and responding to the provocations. We'll see how they frame that a little bit later on in the show as we get into the documents generated by that Second Continental Congress. Eventually, that will include the Declaration of Independence, but we're not there yet. So in the summer of 1775, there's two major documents that they produce. July 5th, 1775, they approve what's called the Olive Branch Petition, which, as the name suggests, is an attempt to work with the British government, and particularly another appeal to the king. We saw one of those back with the First Continental Congress, and now a second one here. We'll talk about that a little bit, but our focus today is going to be on the document that was adopted the next day, July 6th, 1775, which is called the Declaration of the Causes and Necessity of Taking Up Arms. And so you see, even though the war has begun, and now it's about 2.5 months underway, they believe they have an obligation to give reasons for what they're doing, and not just to say that this is why, but to declare the necessity of it, to recognize this is not something that they've decided to do willy-nilly. That it's just something, a matter of a few hotheads up in Boston area that can't control themselves and are stirring up trouble unnecessarily, but they've been led step by step through a long process of years and events to this stage where it's necessary, they're going to argue, to take up arms. Not yet to establish their independence. Again, they're going to emphasize that in the text of the document itself. Not yet, but at least to secure their rightful place and their rights within the empire. So the last document we'll look at today, which is in some ways a response to those documents, although technically it was promulgated before either of them had made their way to England. In August 23rd, 1775, the king issued a declaration of rebellion in response to the Battle of Bunker Hill. And so that really, in some ways, the die is cast at that point. Now, it's still going to be 10 months, 11 months almost before the Declaration of Independence. But at that point, it becomes clear that the king sees Americans, broadly speaking, as in rebellion, not just a small band of people, is demanding their submission and really their absolute submission to his authority and that of Parliament. And so putting the Americans in a situation where, unless they're willing to go back on everything they've been saying over the course of now 12 years almost, they're going to have to decide to separate from Britain. Now, have to build consensus for that. That's going to be a political process. We'll talk about that in coming shows. But by the end of the summer of 1775, it's difficult to imagine a scenario where the war ends favorably for the American colonists without the establishment of a new country. All right, so let's dive into the documents, and let's begin, as we said, with the Declaration of the Causes and Necessity of Taking Up Arms. This was authored primarily by Thomas Jefferson and John Dickinson. And you'll see some echoes of some things we've seen before from Jefferson. You'll see a little bit of a foretaste of things to come. But John Dickinson, also a very important figure, a more conservative figure. It's a nice pairing, honestly, because Jefferson was somebody who was usually pushing further than others perhaps were ready to go. Dickinson was the one who was kind of holding back a little bit, wanted to make every effort to maintain the good order of the empire. He was a lawyer who cared about forms, who cared about legal processes, and was very cautious in moving things past the point where there would be no return. And so the combination of Jefferson and Dickinson, I think, gives this document a nice flavor to it as we go through it.
And you say that as a proud Dickinson alum.
That's right.
There you go. Well, let me let's get into this. And you see that Dickinsonian influence on the document, because here in this first paragraph of the Declaration of the Causes and Necessity of Taking Up Arms, there's an appeal, an appeal to God, the divine author. So I'll read this first paragraph. If it was possible for men who exercise their reason to believe that the divine author of our existence intended a part of the human race to hold an absolute property in and an unbounded power over others, marked out by his infinite goodness and wisdom as the objects of a legal domination never rightfully resistible, however severe and oppressive, the inhabitants of these colonies might at least require from the Parliament of Great Britain some evidence that this dreadful authority over them has been granted to that body. That's a long sentence. But
Yeah.
is God has God made the world so that the British can enslave their American colonists? The answer is no. But a reverence for our Creator, principles of humanity, and the dictates of common sense must convince all those who reflect upon the subject that government was instituted to promote the welfare of mankind and ought to be administered for the attainment of that end. So, not only kind of a reference here to God, our Creator, the divine author, but also to our common sense. The intersection of common sense and a
Right.
belief of God shows you that slavery is wrong, that ruling over another without their consent or representation is wrong. So here, this balance, as you said earlier, between Jefferson and Dickinson on the point, and I think this is going to be very, very important as we go through today's episode, because not only are the American leaders trying to make the case that what is happening to them is unjust, but they know that right around the corner, they're going to have to establish a just government in place of the one that is unjust. So, upon what basis or foundation can a new just regime be established?
Yeah, that's a great point because even if they're not going to declare independence, and again, they're saying very clearly they don't want to do that just yet, nevertheless, they are establishing governing institutions. Right? The Continental Congress, and now the Second Continental Congress, is representative body. It's gathering people from the various colonies, and they're building institutions. They're flexing those governing muscles. And so, how is it that those institutions will have real legitimacy, not just among, let's say, the most radical patriots, but among the American people at large? If this becomes a government of sorts, it's going to have to govern over those who were tepidly in favor of independence or who were tepidly patriotic, as well as some who were loyal and were doubtful of this cause. You're going to have to be able to establish authority over the whole group. And that's going to require that you exercise a measure of restraint, that you give good reasons for your actions, that you establish grounds for legitimacy beyond merely the demands of the moment and the impulses that come with that.
I think another thing that comes up in this introduction to the Declaration of Causes is the fact that you begin to see that the appeal is going to be made based upon a common standard of what is right and what is just. And that standard is to be broadcast, throughout the world, but that the
Yeah.
world is an audience, that humankind is an audience for what is being declared here. The last sentence of this first paragraph. Yet, however blinded that assembly may be, this is the legislature of Great Britain, by their intemperate rage for unlimited domination, so to cite justice in the opinion of mankind, we esteem ourselves bound by obligations of respect to the rest of the world to make known the justice of our cause. That, Matt, here, there's a justice that lies outside of any particular regime or any particular relationship between one regime and the next. And that justice is something that, whether it's understood or not, whether it's recognized or not, it's always present. It always has to be the standard by which we judge the affairs of mankind.
That's right. This is the laws of nature and of nature's God that's going to be appealed to in the Declaration of Independence. God has established a moral order to the universe. We all know that, whether we acknowledge him or any of the specifics that fall out under that or not. And so we are obliged to give good reasons for our actions, to measure those actions against the true cause of justice, the true nature of justice. And a failure to acknowledge that doesn't change the fact. So it's one of the things that's admirable, I think, in the American founders over and over again to say, look, we know we have to measure up to this bar. We didn't make the bar. We have to measure up to it. And we're going to do our best to make the case that our actions do, in fact, conform to that. But you're going to have to judge that. You're going to have to evaluate that. You're going to have to review the facts yourself and use your own judgment. And we recognize that if we fall short, that there's going to be cause for complaint against us. And likewise, you have to acknowledge that, right? That this is the bar that's really going to be the measure between Britain and America. It's no longer common law. It's no longer dusty old charters. This is the point that John Adams was pointing forward to. We talked about the first Continental Congress, that you have to appeal to the law of nature and to say this is really the standard that we all have to measure our actions by.
Yeah, and once again, and we've mentioned this a couple times in this series, these aren't theoretical abstractions. These are real live events, and hence there's always historical context given to why they're thinking about independence right now, and why it could be justified based upon the facts of history, or the events of history, I should say. So in the next paragraph, he goes into that. They go into this narrative. Our forefathers, inhabitants of the island of Great Britain, left their native land to seek on these shores a residence for civil and religious freedom. So why did we come here in the first place? We came here for civil and religious freedom. We came here for the very reason that we've just been talking about. We want to live in an environment where the rule of law, not the rule of men, where justice, not power, determines how we live with one another. And that has been undone by the actions of the British government over the previous 11 years. So what do we do now? We are a group of devoted colonies, and we have shown our devotion to the king. We have shown our devotion to some standards of English common law. But what do we do now? Now that you want to kind of place us outside of that common law and treat us differently?
Yeah, one of the things that's a little bit different here from some of the documents we've reviewed previously in the last several podcasts is that they don't really go through in detail all the grievances. It's sort of, well, look, we've established this before. Right? You can go back and read the old documents. We've cited the laws, chapter and verse. We've run through the history, and it's the same history. Nothing's really changed. You've not hurt us. We had people that were our friends that tried to help. That effort failed, and so we don't need to rehearse it all. But what we need to do is come back to the essential principle, which, as they quote it several paragraphs in, takes us all the way back to the Declaratory Act. If you recall, that was the law that was passed after the repeal of the Stamp Act, where the Parliament asserts the right to make laws to bind the colonies in all cases whatsoever.
We rule and you do whatever we say.
That's it. And so basically the question for the colonists at that point is, if that's the principle, now when that principle was announced, we didn't know if you actually meant it. or let's put it this way, we didn't know what you would do with it. But now we do know what you will do with it. And it's pretty ugly. And we're finding that you mean it. And we don't really know where that assertion or the claims you're going to make under it will stop. And so what do we have to do? Well, we have to find a way to defend ourselves. And we've tried all the normal means. There's no one in the Parliament to protect us. We don't have any votes there. We have some friends, but again, not enough to make a difference. But we have no direct representatives. We've made appeals. We've sent petitions across. We've made our case publicly and in private correspondence, and nothing's changed. And so what's left? There's really no peaceful remedies available to us at this point.
And here are remnants of historical question: what is justice? And you think back to Plato's Republic and that hinge point in the Republic where Thrasymachus comes forward and says, Socrates, stop asking these questions about what justice is. Justice is simply this: it's the advantage of the stronger. And here you see the Americans say, that's really basically what you're telling us. If you can make laws in
Right.
all cases whatsoever, you are telling us that justice is the advantage of the stronger, and you're going to exert that power, not simply with your statutes, but with your armies in this land. And so we, as you said, they ask in this next line, what is to defend us against so enormous, so unlimited a power? I mean, it's just brought everything right to the fore. If this is the way that you're going to go about governing us, then we have to change our way of thinking about where we're situated within that relationship.
Yeah. And so, we've made our efforts. We've done all the things that we can think to do, and really the British tradition, petitioning and asking for a redress of grievances, all that fine language that we've seen in various charters along the way. And yet, what have we received in response to that? Well, the Parliament back in February says there's a rebellion going on in Massachusetts. And rather than hearing the voice of moderation from a Lord Chatham, William Pitt, or from Edmund Burke, only ratchets up the intensity of the conflict. And so, again, where does that leave you? What hope do you have at that point? Now, does that mean you have to fight a war? Not necessarily, but then that's where British aggression locally comes into play. We've got the aggressive actions of the Parliament and the King. And in keeping with that, perhaps carrying out those intentions in a more specific way, now you have General Gage there in Massachusetts, and he's bringing forth military might in a way that is confrontational. This is not something where it's just a matter of maintaining basic peace and order. It's in your face. And we know the story of Paul Revere's ride on the 18th of April in 75, and then again the battles the following day, and they tell that story. And no, it's probably the colonist version of that story to a certain degree, but they're putting the facts before a candid world. So judge it as you will. Read the accounts of the events and compare it to what they're saying. Decide for yourself if they're giving an honest account of what happened. But who's the aggressor? At every turn, it seems that it's the British government that's been the aggressor, both in terms of the role of the Parliament, the role of the King, and now the army on the ground.
Right. So if you're going to understand the colonists as rebels and not treat them as devoted to English law, you're going to treat them in a certain way. And we've tried over and over again to say that we don't want to rebel for the sake of rebellion. We're actually not rebels. We're actually upholding everything that is within English common law. So we really have no alternative right now. The question before us as colonists is whether we submit and just be enslaved, or we use force ourselves. And you might put us in a position, and this has certainly happened in Concord and Lexington, where we've had to use force ourselves to defend our rights. They write, honor, justice, and humanity forbid us tamely to surrender that freedom which we receive from our gallant ancestors and which our innocent posterity have a right to receive from us. So a complete different understanding of who the colonists are, who the British are, who's just in this case, who's unjust in this case. It just seems it's gotten to the point where there's really how much can conciliation work if you can't even identify who's the individual who's unjust in this case.
Yeah, exactly. And that's where the conversation is going to go as Thomas Paine publishes Common Sense, and it's going to ask out of common sense, okay, war has begun, blood has been shed. Can you really unwind all that, go back to a time and to a relationship before that? Now, it's not like civil wars don't sometimes end with reconciliation. Obviously, we think about the American experience of civil war and the struggles for sure of reconciliation, but ultimately bringing the nation back together. But it's not easy. And so as we begin to get to the end of the document, they say, our cause is just, our union is perfect, our internal resources are great, and if necessary, foreign assistance is undoubtedly attainable. That one probably is going to require independence because no foreign country wants to get involved in a civil war. So that's one of the hinge points, as we'll see, for declaring independence. And of course, then the French and the Spanish will ally themselves with the United States in time. But this is the way they want to present themselves to the British government and really to the world at this point. Just cause with perfect union. And are you really sure you want to stand against that? The appeal is to a kind of common sense that hasn't broken through yet. The arguments that have been made, as much as the American position has been represented ably by its friends, it's not broken through. And so now, at the point where men are in the field, battles are being fought, will that be enough to kind of shake up the British establishment and bring some sobriety to their measures? That's the last gasp hope here.
Yeah, and I think you don't see referenced explicitly here, but you see a common sense drawn from a Lockean political principles. And Locke had
Yeah.
written almost a century prior his Second Treatise of Government, and the last chapter of the Second Treatise of Government is of the dissolution of government. And Locke brings up a really important point here that you are not acting rebellious if you seek to dissolve an unjust government, that you're actually doing something that's proactive for what is just and right in that case. So here he begins that chapter by saying, he that will with any clearness speak of the dissolution of government ought in the first place to distinguish between the dissolution of the society and the dissolution of the government. And he'll go through in this chapter ways that government is dissolved. And the way that he mentions here at the beginning of this chapter is, the usual and almost only way where union is dissolved is in the inroad of foreign force making a conquest upon them. And I think this is what we're seeing, right, in Concord and Lexington, that if you once viewed us as your colonists and the umbrella of British justice covered us, but now you're seeing us outside of that umbrella, and you are the ones who are identifying the Americans, right, as a foreign entity, if not as a rebellious entity, as a foreign entity, and then you're using your power, right, to undo just governance that was in place in the American colonies. So, what do we do at that point? It begs the question for the Americans. Well, we have to defend ourselves. We have to defend a peace within our civil society, and then we're going to have to perhaps establish a new government in the stead of the old government, or that does the thing that we actually have government for in the first place, which is justice and the well-being of the people that live under that government.
So let's try to tie it all together. Maybe it's a few summary points here from the Causes and Necessity document. Number one, they claim Parliament has no divine or legal right to exercise absolute sovereignty over them, but nevertheless claims this power and has exercised it to some degree. So not just the theoretical assertion of that right, but the practical application of that right over the course of a dozen or so years. Secondly, the American colonists have no legal means to protect themselves from the power of the British government. They've exhausted all those efforts. They have no representation, and petitions and appeals have failed over the course of a number of years, a number of efforts that have been, in their mind, at least, they've gone the extra mile. They've made the extra attempt to try to establish peaceful relations and to restore good feeling between the two sides. Thirdly, that the war was brought upon them by the aggressive action of the British Army and has forced them to choose between slavery and conflict. So the only terms they're being offered, to use modern language, are unconditional surrender. And they know what unconditional surrender looks like in theory. and partly in practice, and they're unwilling to go for that. Lastly, that they will fight together with both moral, that is divine, and practical hope of success at this point for the restoration of the empire, not yet independence.
So this begs the question, Matt, why, if they're in this position and putting forth this document in this way where it seems common sense tells you that you're at war, why will they offer in July 5th an Olive Branch petition to the king? What's the rationale for that? If because it seems here like they've clearly identified where they are, but why an olive branch?
Well, I think this is something where you have to maybe think about maybe at two levels. One is there's the practical politics of it. Not everyone in the assembly is ready personally to talk about independence. And even if they were, they're representatives of colonies, and they're all given instructions from the colonial assembly, and they don't have instructions to petition or establish independent government. So they have to tread somewhat lightly in that context. And part of bringing people along politically and prudentially is being willing to do that thing that you don't expect will work, but we're going to say, well, one more time, we'll send a petition to the king saying, look, we're going to blame your ministers. We're going to blame the parliament. We're going to assume you're that patriotic king we've talked about you as. And we're going to appeal to the best of who you are, your family, the whole history of the monarchy, and consider you still a nursing father of this people, despite the fact that we don't have a lot of evidence probably on the ground that that's the case. So there's some prudential element to this. There's some political element to this. And I think there's a genuine hope, again, that maybe Bunker Hill, a real battle, real conflict, thousands of troops now in the field, not just a scattered militia, a few Minutemen tumbling out of the woods at a particular point on a certain day in April, but now real battles, lines being drawn up, leaders dying, right? Like this is war. Is that enough to sober up the king and through him the ministry and the parliament? Probably not. But could it be? Maybe.
We're still eager to restore peace.
Yeah.
You have to give us reasonable terms. King's
Yeah.
reply. How does the king reply to this olive branch?
The king says no thanks, essentially. And again, to be fair, the king had already written his proclamation of rebellion before he got wind of Olive Branch petition. So he didn't even receive that petition. He was responding to the Battle of Bunker Hill. But even so, any effort on the American side to conciliate with the king was simply rejected. And so what he's doing in a very powerful way is saying, not only are you people of Boston, people of Lexington and Concord, Massachusetts, maybe the Patriots gathering in Philadelphia, not only are you in rebellion, but no one can have sympathy with you anymore. So all your friends in England who have been working to try to advance your cause, you're now dealing with traitors. So they're on notice. He's putting them all on notice. He's putting your neighbor on notice back in Massachusetts, saying, you've got a patriot neighbor who's one of the Sons of Liberty. Well, you better report that person. That person's now a traitor. That person's no friend of local government, no friend of protecting your rights. That person's a traitor now. And so you have an obligation as a good subject, as a loyal subject, to act accordingly. And so this is one of the things that I think probably expanded, frankly, the reach of the rebellion. It's one thing to think, yeah, Sam Adams, a little hot-tempered. I'm not sure I'd go quite as far as he does. Another thing to be said, yeah, now turn him in as a traitor. Well, hold on. I'm not sure I want to do that. And so people that were leaning on the Patriot side, leaning toward the Patriot side, but not maybe committed, all of a sudden are finding themselves forced by the king to make a choice. Are you with your neighbors, with those Sons of Liberty, with those patriots who are defending your rights and your liberties? Or are you with the oppressive crown and parliament who are demanding absolute submission?
You may not know the answer to this question, Matt, but What would be the medium by which the king's reply to Bunker Hill would have been received by American colonials? Do you have a set of papers that are loyal to the crown that are kind of getting, his kind of PR side of the debate or dispute out there, and then some more colonial presses that are kind of more in favor of independence?
I'm sure it would have been published in newspapers, no doubt. I mean, the press in those days was all partisan, and every newspaper had a partisan angle, and there were many newspapers. So no doubt that would have been published in newspapers. They would have also been just transported to governors, because you still had the local governors for the various colonies that would have been the official recipients of these kinds of things, and it would have been their job to proclaim them and to make them widely known. I mean, this is meant to be a general proclamation. There is not
Yeah.
hide this under a bushel. This is supposed to be everybody is supposed to know there is a rebellion underway. You must choose sides. You want to be a British subject in good standing and not be guilty of treason yourself. You have to make every effort you can to suppress this rebellion.
Yeah, I asked that question because there really is kind of a public relations element to this
Yeah,
reply. You had mentioned this that like you know, you fall under my crown, and you have been misled by dangerous and ill-designing men. So that kind of divide and conquer.
hmm
Do not follow the John Adams, the Thomas Jeffersons of the world. They have misled you. So I think that's really interesting that
right.
he takes that tack.
Yeah, and it sort of gives you an out for the moment. You can say, yeah, I was misled, right? In the same way that the American colonists with the Olive Branch Petition are saying to the king, blame your ministers. You were badly advised. It's the cabinet that's really at fault. Blame them, and we're good. And the king comes back and says to those who are on the sidelines in all this, look, your neighbors are talking up conflict and making statements about rights, and you were led along by them. It's natural. They're your friends. But now understand the real situation. Now they're rebels, they're traitors, and you've got to draw a line there. And so, there's an attempt to kind of force people once again to choose their sides. And I think probably to the king's disappointment, a lot of people chose the side of the patriot cause rather than the cause of the distant and detached king.
I also think it's really interesting that he ends his reply with the final four words, God save the king. Because here we
Yeah.
had seen in the American Declaration an appeal, right, to
Yep.
the author of nature and but he's saying, God save the king, like I am the king, right? God has made me the king. I have rightful authority in this situation.
All right. Well, let's talk about how all this applies. And I think one of the things that comes out of this so clearly, and not just these particular documents, but the sequence of documents we've been looking at over the last several podcasts, is the way that the Americans are in real time on the ground establishing legitimate government. So we talked about a few episodes ago the First Continental Congress, and we looked at several documents they produced, and we said, well, we're going to wait to talk about the fourth one until later, which was written to the people of British North America, written to their fellow citizens. And I'm not going to go through all the details of that here, but just to recognize what they're doing in that document was to basically say, look, here we are as your representatives acting on your behalf. They go through the whole history there. If you want a good summary of the history of the conflict over those dozen or so years, great document in order to find that. And they lay it all out, law by law, year by year, response by response, and show that there's no reason to believe that this is just accidental. And there's a pattern of behavior here. There's an effort underway to change the terms of the relationship between the American colonists and the British government. That had been a great relationship for 100 plus years, and now it's changing. And so now these leaders are asking the people to walk with them through the series of events and the implications of those events to understand what it all means and to begin to understand that they're going to have to think fresh thoughts about how they're going to govern themselves and what it means to be a responsible citizen in this context. Now, Will that lead to the establishment of a national government? Again, in 1774, we don't know that. But they're doing and beginning to do the kinds of things that sovereign bodies do. And they're beginning to establish the kind of legitimacy for their actions that the parliament, frankly, has given up. The parliament once had the confidence of the American people. It no longer does. What will replace that? Well, certainly the local assemblies have their confidence, but you need a national assembly too. And the Continental Congress, the first one, and now the second one, as we're talking about today, begin to build that confidence by taking responsible actions, by making good arguments, by following and leading the people in terms of their judgment and public opinion. And so it's really fascinating to see the beginnings of a new government emerging day by day, month by month, even before they're quite conscious of the fact that they're doing that. And yet here it is, establishing the consent of the governed as the foundation of this newly emerging American government.
And going back to Locke here, the last chapter of the Second Treatise of Government is on the dissolution of government, and he makes it clear that the dissolution of government is not the same thing as the dissolution of society. And all of the previous chapters in the Second Treatise are that architecture of justice through consent that would then be the basis, right, for establishing a new government in the stead of the one that's been dissolved. And that's exactly what they're thinking about. All right. So the more that they can state what those foundations are, what those principles are in a reasonable fashion, the more likely the thing that they build new, if they have to build something new, will be built upon a proper foundation.
And how many revolutions are prudent?
Mm-hmm.
How many revolutions are sober? How many revolutions allow you to pass peacefully from one government to another? Now, I know there's a war going on in terms of American colonists versus the British, but think about the way that they were to establish the basic rudiments of a working government on the fly, speaking on behalf of a people in a way that the people can resonate with, regulating their economic affairs, the embargo, and then eventually working out trade agreements and all these kinds of things, calling out and organizing an army, working on diplomatic measures, right? I mean, all this is happening almost spontaneously. And the American people are moving without the least disruption of their basic order from 100+ years of allegiance to the British crown to this new allegiance to an American identity that's only just being formed.
It's just, we're going to celebrate this in a couple months here. It's just amazing. It's so unique in all of human history that they were able to do these two things at the same time. Not perfectly, but that they're focused both on having, right, to win a war they didn't want and to establish a peace, which we know from our mentor, Angelo Tocqueville, is the hardest thing to do. Like after a war, how do you establish a peace thereafter that is lasting, that is just? But they're thinking about this, and they're, like you said, they're putting into place, right, kind of some institutional frameworks whereby that will be given its best likelihood to succeed. Pretty amazing stuff, Matt.
It is. Yeah, it's been fun going through some of these lesser known documents. Obviously, we're going to get to the Declaration of Independence. We've got a few other of the big heavy hitters coming up in our remaining podcasts of the series. But it's been fun to see how much there is in these other documents that don't get as much play, and really how impressive not just the Declaration is that, we sort of think, well, that just comes out of nowhere. Well, it doesn't come out of nowhere. It comes out of a long series of documents and public documents that are building arguments, that are making responsible assertions, that are following the evidence and building upon notions of natural law and natural right. And it's a culmination of an effort rather than the sort of singular moment that's so striking and worthy of celebration as it is. It's final act of a play that's been unfolding for years.
Another play that was unfolding 2 weeks ago down in Georgia was our Masters picks. Not really a highlight for either one of us. Maybe if we would have picked on Sunday, we would have had a good chance.
Right. Yeah.
Anyway,
about 6 p.m. on Sunday. Yeah.
That's right. Rory won. Scheffler did give him a run for his money at the
Yeah,
end there.
he did. He did. Yeah.
I think he played a little too cautiously that last round. But just and Roy didn't play well the last round, but still, I think it built up such a lead on those first 2 days.
Right.
It was really tough to pick him off there at the end. Really great math that Sunday. Just watching that when, at a certain time, I think there were 6 or 7 people all within 3 strokes of the lead. I mean, it was a lot of fun. Just what a great tournament. And yeah, now we move on, and now we're entering into playoff season in both the NHL and NBA. And you picked
Yep.
for today a bonus pick, but you picked for today. Who are our picks for Western and Eastern Conference finalists, and then who will be in the NBA finals, and then who our champion will be? And I think looking at our notes, we're in somewhat agreement here. But Matt, give me your Western and Eastern Conference finalists, and I'll give you mine. So who do you think is going to be
Okay.
there at the end, East and West,
All right.
West and East?
So we're a few games into the playoffs, and frankly, I think my picks are less secure because of that, because we've got injuries and uncertainties that have emerged over the last couple days. I'm still going to go with the two teams that were the dominant players in the West all year, the Thunder and the Spurs. I think they meet in the Western Conference Final. It'll be a great series. How about you, Dave?
I like the Thunder a lot. It's so hard to repeat.
Yeah.
And it's not just because I live in Colorado, but there's something about that Nuggets team, that Joker, he's just so good.
Yeah.
And he's just mature. And Wemby, I mean, that's going to be great next series if the Nuggets end up playing the Spurs. But I think the Nuggets find a way to win that and play against the Thunder. I'm with you though on the East. I think Boston versus Cleveland is probably the most likely matchup. The Pistons are having a difficult time at it. New York, I think Boston can beat New York. So I'm going to go with Thunder Nuggets, Boston, Cleveland. And then as I move to the next round, I think it's going to be the Nuggets versus the Celtics, which is really
Okay.
interesting because you had the Nuggets win 3 years ago, Celtics won 2 years ago. So they both have that championship pedigree. But I say Nuggets, Boston, and I think the Celtics will win. And I think they've got a really good shot I mean, this was a rebuilding year. Can you imagine if they win
Right.
the
I know.
championship in a rebuilding year? That'd be amazing. But that's what I'm going with.
Okay, I've got Spurs against Boston in the finals after a Boston-Cleveland Eastern Conference final, and I do have Boston winning it all. We're both homers, let's face
Yeah,
it,
I was gonna say
but why
exactly.
not? And the funny thing is, at the moment, who's the healthiest team around? I mean, it might be Boston
Yeah.
because now with Tatum back, they're healthier than I mean, Wembanyama's got a concussion, and the Thunder just lost a piece. Williams got hurt, so I mean, ironically, it could be the Celtics that are actually the most healthy team down the stretch of the playoffs and are able to ride that all the way to the championship.
Yeah, and if I mean, Tatum hasn't had to play all year, so he's rested.
Right.
I mean, he could be the most energetic person in the whole postseason. So I think that plays well. But you gave us a bonus here too, Matt.
Yep.
It's draft. It's first round tonight. Patriots. We love having the 31st pick. It means that we got to the Super Bowl last year.
Right.
So Mountain Standard Time, and that means about 9:30 ish. Who are they going to take? And I don't think they're going to take anyone tonight. I think that, you asked the question, where do you think Ty Simpson will be drafted? I think he will be drafted in the first round, and in all likelihood, the Patriots trade with Arizona. They don't give the Jets Ty Simpson, the poor Jets. Look at just the
Yeah.
poor Jets. But I have them. I'll stay up with my son Jack tonight. Not too late, but he'll be disappointed we hadn't picked someone tonight. But it'll make
Yeah.
tomorrow much more fun. What do you think? Who do the Patriots pick? And will Ty Simpson be drafted? Do you like this scenario?
Yeah, I'm with you. I think I agree with you on that. I think someone's going to like to trade back into the first round to get him. I think Arizona is a good bet for that. Patriots are like a willing trade partner, so I think that would all come together. The Jets have 3 first-round picks next year, so they might be tanking again this year and try to get in the Arch Manning sweepstakes, win that next year. But in any case, yeah, I think the Cardinals will take Simpson at 31. Patriots don't have a pick, but then they get a little extra draft capital next year or perhaps this year to move down a few spots into the second round.
Looks great. And I also see that you have the Cardinals taking Jeremiah Love. How that'd be an exciting night to be a Cardinals fan if you get Simpson and Love, two great players.
You'd feel pretty good, I think, walking out of the draft in that situation, or at least you have a lot of optimism. Who knows how it all play out? But that's the kind of thing that gives a franchise a real jolt.
Yep, exactly. Well, that's it for today. Great show. Enjoy the next 2 or 3 days of the draft. I love this, but it'll be fun. We'll see where we are at the end of the week, and I'm sure you'll be getting a lot of texts from me. So,
looking forward to it. Well, that's going to wrap it up for today's show. Thank you, as always, for joining us. You can reach out to us at democracyinamericatoday@gmail.com. You can also follow us on YouTube and on Instagram, and we'll look forward to talking to you again real soon.